If you were to search the association's TIS database of recorded cargo crimes across the Europe, Middle East and Africa region, you could easily reach the conclusion that thefts at railway operation facilities are not a major cause for concern. 3 years of reporting data shows only 155 incidents in 22 countries, and only 4 crimes with a reported loss value of more than 100,000 euros. But once again, a lack of reporting paints a very misleading picture. Over the last 10 years, rail transport has seen strong demand as manufacturers and logistics service providers have diversified their use of multimodal logistics solutions. As rail transportation solutions have gained more interest and volumes versus air and ocean freight, the appetite of criminals to target the sector has also increased. And their ability to strike has been further enabled by factors such as supply chain bottlenecks, industrial action, and geopolitical instability. All of these factors contribute to congestion at ports and rail terminals and delays, which can leave containers and rail cars often sitting still for long periods in remote terminals, giving cargo thieves more time to plan and execute thefts. So today we ask, how secure is rail transportation? Well, I'm delighted to say that joining us to answer this question and to give us more insight is Antonio Knezevic, VP Head of Regional Security and Operational Resilience Europe at DHL Global Forwarding, and also a member of the TAPA EMEA Board of Directors. Antonio's here to talk about ongoing trends and the modus operandi used by criminals to commit crime on the rail segments of end-to-end supply chains. And you'll be pleased to hear he'll also discuss mitigation measures to minimise risks at railway freight terminals and to increase network resilience. So, without further ado, Antonio, let me welcome you to the studio. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me hand over you to tell us more.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here and see quite a big audience here today. So really looking forward to guide you through some insight coming from rail risk perspective. We can probably skip here the agenda. I will guide you through slide by slide. I propose started with actually this slide because and this picture which you can see on your screen. I mean, rail risks and crime related to rail transportation. It's not something new, right? It has started approximately like 200 years ago, right? When the first rail infrastructure have been installed, right? So historically, the rail theft were, as you can see, more opportunistic and basically managed really in this. You could see that even in the Western movies, right? And this was actually where all get started, but by the modernization and industrial change, it has also at the same time developed, right? And the criminals become more and more sophisticated and very well prepared, which eventually led you to realize only upon you receive your container at the destination center that something eventually went wrong. So I'm going to now explain you a little bit based on our experience, the industry, what has been faced, what are the triggers, or let's say the red flags you would need to look at and potentially strive for change to mitigate those risks, right? Of course, I can say pandemic, global shipping backlog. I mean, as we love to say here at TAPA, cargo at rest, it's always cargo at risk. And there is plenty of rest when it comes to rail transportation from one terminal to the other, changing the wagon, the locomotive and wagon eventually on the border point. So quite a lot of opportunities from that perspective. The factor which contribute to rail theft, as I alluded before, are one of the bigger one. It's obviously the supply chain bottlenecks, right? So congestion at the port, at the rail terminal. I mean, we are living in unprecedented times, and with diversified supply chain, with not classical solution which we used to have for years. we really had to reinvent, in a way, the routings, the wheels, and that often means prolonging the lead time and including additional stops and steps along the way. So that all put containers at risk, right? Of course, especially following pandemic, labor shortage, it is also problematic. So obviously, less people, also less control from one perspective. And at the same time, the economic crisis is bringing really huge demand for consumer goods. So it's really also an important factor. We see the more we go, the more people, as I like to say, the people who maybe used to buy those products, if they have the opportunity, now they take different means to get access to these commodities, right? And of course, under still financial pressure, lack of coordinated security, not investing or remodernating the infrastructure also poses really significant opportunities. In this slide, just for who's not familiar, before I talk about really then on the risks, are let's say, I'm focusing predominantly actually this presentation on the China-Europe rail solutions and risk related, right? But of course, what we're going to look, especially in the next slide, it can be also related within European continent, in EMEA generally, and also I can tell you in the US nowadays, there is quite a lot going on from when it comes to rail transportation and cargo crime, right? So, but focusing here on China-Europe, let's say you can see we have 4 main way to move the cargo. 3 are basically related to pure rail transportation, while the last one, it's intermodal, as we say. So first part, ocean, and then rail. But starting from the northern corridor, of course, I don't want to really enter into political discussion, obviously, here, bear with me, but obviously the northern corridor goes from China directly to Russia, which is, and while the western corridor, let's say the most practiced one, transit from China, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Russia, Belarus, and Poland. And this is the one, let's say, the preferred, so to say, route, because obviously it's also it's also one, let's say, the shorter solution as well. Of course, then you have the middle corridor, which goes through China, Kazakhstan, Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey to Europe. This is a little bit more elaborated, I have to say, but it's still an opportunity. And then there is, or there used to be, the, let's say, the more the southern corridor, which now obviously with the Red Sea crisis is linked to the intermodal transportation, so going through the Cape of Good and bringing then the containers into Europe, right? So where we see, or where I could say, where we experience or we see the majority of risk, or what we're going to look in the next slide, it's predominantly related to the western corridor, right? So important to know. So yeah, on a nutshell here, actually, where are the security risk lies within the distribution chain? So through the years, we seen that Kazakhstan represent, let's say, a bigger risk area compared the rest, right? Obviously, there are a number of opportunities there. There is a bordering point with China. There is a waiting time there, changing from Chinese train into Kazakhstan, so Kazakh one. And of course, to whom's not familiar, there is a big desert, right, where those rails, those trains are crossing. So very remote opportunities to intervene, right? So, which is a perfect spot for criminal activities as well, right? Going to the European side, I would say, knocking on wood, it's relatively stable and calm. Germany with some of the terminal used to be problematic until a couple of years ago. But I have to say, with the investment the rail terminal had, and the proactive measures taken, I think it's I can say relatively fairly that we are quite good at that at this moment of time. But of course, again, we are not 100% free, especially intra-Europe transportation. There are also opportunities, right? And again, it's all about the staging time of those. Well, obviously the container is on the train and the train is moving, logically doesn't present big opportunities. But of course, the dwelling time at the staging moment, that's where the criminals become active, right? Yeah, I think this is something I think interesting to look at. So left side, you see the challenges, and on the right side, the potential mitigation measure. So from this challenge side, basically usage of basic seals, and you see them on the bottom side of the left, on the left slide. So those represent big opportunities, and we also noticed through the years that they can be very easily manipulated, right? So in this case would be really important to use adequate sealing methods, right? So tamper evidence seal, so making their life more complicated, right? Because nowadays with 3D printers, for example, the orange one, it's easily drilled out and repushed back without even the other two, the customs one and the rail shipping rail company one are also very, very easy to be manipulated. We see them really in apparent good condition upon arrival, but then finally there was some breach into the containers, right? So sealing, it's a very important element here, and I can tell you plays a big role in this, right? Because it is really essential that the containers are adequately sealed with tamper evidence seal. T-bar, you see that on the right picture, call it also Navelock if you like, the classical bar which is applied on the two barriers of the door. This also can be an added value, but at the same time can bring challenges and opportunities, right? So what we realized also over the time, especially this is a requirement many times driven by the manufacturer when they want to have this specific bar. But if you ask my humble opinion, I would leave without it because it attracts unnecessary highs in my view. And the protection layer which gives you, it's really removed in a seconds with a portable grinder. But we realized in some scenario where we were applying those bars as high as possible, we're also playing a very important role in preventing the containers being open, because obviously you need to make the criminal's life more difficult and not having just in front of them that bar. So if you put it on the highest level possible, can be really also a good solution, right? But of course, important, make sure that from an health and safety perspective, that will not create problematics upon arrival to whom has to really then finally remove those bars. So this is an important element to be really taken in consideration, right? Yeah, I mentioned you before, especially through Kazakhstan, containers are traveling through really remote areas, and the visibility and even sometimes the GPS coverage is not optimal, but again, no visibility, it's a really big problem there. So it is really also important to basically equip those containers with technology, preferably inside. It's a little bit what I mentioned you before on the T-bar topic. We don't want to attract unnecessary attention and highs by putting heavy locks or GPS or whatever. It's also actually a topic also, to be honest, also for a customs perspective, you might have issues on on the bordering point, because sometimes they do inspection, and if there are physical external devices going beyond the bar, which need to be manually or electronically unlocked, can be a problematic, right? So it's really important really to have that visibility, fit the containers with the devices, and then make sure that there is proper live monitoring, right? Another element, as it's the lack of CCTV coverage. The terminals, being port or rail, are not equivalent to warehouses or airports, right? So you might have CCTVs covering some areas, but imagine a yard with 100, 200, 300 containers. You would never have the optimal view and coverage of one specific container, unless, of course, you discuss really in detail with your service provider, with the rail operator, ad hoc setup and solution, how to handle those containers, how to store it. If there is a dedicated area, go for it. Make sure this is permanently under CCTV if that's an opportunity. If that's not an option, the easier, let's say, solution would be try to position those containers on top of another container, so meaning second or even third layer if it's an option, that they are not simply reachable from the ground, and even better, facing a door of another container. So no really chances to open it unless you really move it, right? Yeah. Also, what is important, it's communication. The communication is key in rail transportation as well, because there is multiple people, multiple players involved in a rail transportation, starting from the manufacturer, from the shipper, to the freight forwarder, through the shipping line, the rail terminal operators, the trucking drivers, and the trucking companies who are picking up those containers from port. So it's essential that there is a sort of setting up a pre-alerting to all the parties involved. Of course, it's also very crucial that you reduce the communication to a need-to-know basis, right? So avoid emailing groups, pre-alerts about XYZ container information, sealing, etc. Define with your preferred provider a dedicated process and dedicated protocols when it comes to visibility and active controls. This is very important for the success, because, just to give you an example, on the railway bill document, not often all the seals are mentioned. So you have the mandatory one, maybe the customs one, the shipper one, but then if you apply a bar, T-bar, or anything else, it's not always documented. And if it's documented, it needs to be properly communicated at all the touch points that they need to check seal 1, 2, and 3 based on their condition, right? Because if there is no communication and no proper SOP and checks in place, eventually you will be ending up people checking only visually that a seal is present without questioning themselves whatever this is the seal which was applied at origin, at the shipper, or maybe has been changed along the route, or maybe has been manipulated. So it's very important that I always like to, when we do high value transportation by rail, set up really a protocol when, as soon as the container it's picked up from the shipper, there is a visual documentation, taking picture of the seal condition, pre-alerting destination team and key players along the chain to make sure that the people knows how the container departed from origin and how it's supposed to be at the various touch point until the collection from the terminal at destination. Also, that element is very important, because checking in number of rail terminals, sometimes the receipt they give you when you collect the container from the port, there is even no seal number mentioned. There is only the container number. So again, it's critical that all those little details and steps are properly agreed, documented, and positioned in a sort of SOP way that everyone is clear 100% how the container is supposed to look like, what is supposed to be in place in terms of sealing and check the condition, and that basically would really give this differentiator, right? If you don't do this kind of checks and controls, you will likely end up in problematics. And also another note on the GPS active, it's not sufficient to put a GPS tracker in your container and say, oh, well, nice, I know where the container is, or I know it has been opened. It's very important that the rail operator is engaged into this topic and there is a proper action plan if something goes wrong. There will be your best or our best chance to intervene per time and eventually recover the cargo. Because I've seen, especially in the past, containers equipped with trackers, but at the end of the day there was maybe applied already at the shipper plan, but there was no really then active follow-up on it, right? Only upon arrival at destination it was realized that there was something wrong. Looking at the data, you could see, oh, well, yeah, actually there was a container opening in that position, in that place, but no one did anything with that alarm. So it's, I would say useless, right? So important also really make sure there is, from that perspective, if you use technology, just use it in a comprehensive manner and including the controls and escalation protocols. Of course, it is also an option, very difficult nowadays. In the past was easier to also deploy security escort team on trains. But there are still some opportunities. So if you really need to ship something really, really valuable or attractive, and if you cannot meet some of the above criteria I mentioned, then the escort team would also really represent a good opportunity. Yeah, moving to the next and my last slide. This is actually just wanted, who's not familiar with DHL Global Forwarding Organization. I think in all what I just mentioned you, our biggest assets and biggest capability is this, as you can see, this 100 professional team. Pretty much in almost all the countries we have a dedicated security resource who can support and knows the risk, knows the environment, knows the local contact, and can support. So that still plays really, and will always, I think, play our people, it's our biggest assets, right? And that will always play the difference, right? Of course, we quite engage into ISO standard. Also talking about resilience, we link it really already, I can proudly say it, since 2014 to business continuity management, ISO 22301 standard, with 80 plus stations certified. We have comprehensive risk assessment approach again. And then we use also Everstream tool, which was also very engaged into TAPA, which also gives us this real-time alerting and awareness, right? Yeah, also without forgetting, TAPA also plays a crucial role in what we do and what we are. Of course, we invest significant amount of time and resources in building a resilient and secure network according to the TAPA standard, right? And then you can also see, obviously, land, sea, and rail transportation, especially on the rail side. This is something we really pretty engaged. But again, it's key, talk and discuss really an ad hoc setup, right? So, yeah.
Antonio, thank you so much. A really interesting presentation, and not surprisingly, I already have some questions for you. And actually, the chat has been buzzing with questions as well. So let me put some of those to you. To start with, overall, from your perspective, is it safe to ship by rail?
It is. It is definitely. It is safe, Sam. But it's also important what I just mentioned before. If you just do it without being cautious about the risks, you will end up in problematics, like in any mode of transport at the end of the day. So people might think, well, it's a long way, little controls. But again, taking really you really need to have a micromanagement from that perspective and really look at every single piece of the chain and say, okay, what do we have here? What do we need there actually to protect? So it is safe and has improved massively, I have to say as well. I mean, back 10 years back, it was way worse. Nowadays, it's quite good, but because, of course, the industry has taken really the proper measures to mitigate some risk. But again, it's key, this control and visibility. So yes, it's definitely safe, but you need to be really properly structured, so to say. So
you said the industry's taken measures to mitigate risk and minimise losses within rail transport. Within those measures that can be taken, what would you say is absolutely key?
Yeah, what would be key? It's really this. So less is more sometimes, right? So not heavy locks and bear with me, the manufacturer of the locks, etc. But our experience and our basically our experience shows that when opportunistic criminals got engaged, that's the first things that they look at. Say, wow, there is a nice lock. There must be something nice in this container, right? So less is more. Use GPS tracker, proper sealing, controls, and make sure that everyone is aware what has to be looked at the very stage. And that's already covering a big portion of the risks. Yeah.
Let me ask you one of the questions that's come in. Apparently you see in the West United States, particularly the Los Angeles area, situations where there are full containers which are opened and then everything is taken and stolen by individuals, not organised groups of criminals, if they're parked at temporary terminals. Is this something that is happening also in Europe as well? And if so, where?
It's a good point, and unfortunately, this is a very true statement, right? I mean, we realize Los Angeles port linked to intermodal, so from the port, then usually trains goes to Arizona, also desert area. So Europe-wise, I can say it's more pilferages rather than entire containers being emptied, right? So it's really opportunistic theft where they can grab. But of course, if you ask me, in Kazakhstan, you can end up in such scenarios as well, where basically half or part of the container is emptied, right? So I've not seen that recently, but that area, it's more, let's say, familiar with this kind of problematics. While here on this side, mainland Europe, I would say more those changing seal, grabbing part of those front pallets, and not really, because of course you need time, resources to unload at the end of the day a full container, right? Well, this is more people who grabs what they can grab, and then they flew, basically. Yeah.
Another question that's come in is, do you believe in protected cargo boxes inside containers which feature GPS, e-locks, alarm sensors or other sensors? Would those deliver extra layers of security, or would DHL as a forwarder refuse to transport them?
No, it's definitely, I mean, when I say inside container GPSs can be within the boxes, the classical one you put on behind the door, the visibility, it's critical, and definitely it's one of those you can certainly use. But what is important, you cannot limit just to this, right? Say, okay, well, I'm putting a device and I'm safe. No, there needs to be then really proper action and protocols defined, right? Because otherwise, if you tell me, well, Antonio, the container you're transporting for me has been open in Kazakhstan, what do we do about it now? That needs to be already set up before, already per various, so to say, terminals already discussed with the nearest intervention group in order that they can really step in if it's necessary.
Another question that's come in is, what response are you getting from railway facility operators when there's a cargo theft? Are they sharing your commitment to increase security?
That's a nice one. And probably we as a TAPA, we should be also trying to look somehow to bring these guys more on board. And because let's say they are really reactive. And in this scenario, from China to Europe, your main contact is always predominantly the Chinese rail operator. So if you go to the terminal, let's say Duisburg, you likely need to go through to the rail operator. So it can, let's say, how to say, extended dwelling time until you get some. But as I said, I mentioned that before. Europe, I think they, especially, I can say Duisburg was a big problematic area back in 7-8 years ago. Now they really, of course, managed to find some bad guys, but they also invested, right? So they understand the risks, and especially this side on the table in Europe mainland, it's probably we are way more advanced than comparing maybe Belarus, Kazakhstan, and those areas, right? So it's a long way to go, but let's say we way better than 10 years ago, I would say.
Let me talk a little bit about TAPA involvement. How can TAPA potentially play a role in enhancing the overall security setup at rail freight terminals? You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but
I think it's a good question, Sam. I think it's important that we should probably be active on this, guys, right? But I think also, for example, our colleagues in Asia, TAPA AP, where most of these cargo come, where most of those shipping rail shipping company are located, we should bring them on board, right? And try to really educate them and try to see even where potentially the FSR standards can somehow be applied in those terminals. I understand you cannot have a FSR A terminal for rail. It's not the landscape, right? But there are actually elements of the same which can play a role and potentially prevent some issues and enhance the overall control, right? So I think, that would be really important. Get engaged with them especially from an origin perspective, but also here on our angle, try to knock on their doors and understand, how we can support them. We have, let's say, the people, the resources, the knowledge, and the standards and the understanding, which maybe they don't necessarily, right? So.
And just as a final point, as I said earlier in the introduction, TAPA EMEA receives a very low number of reports about cargo thefts at railway facilities, but clearly it's a very big problem. Why do we need more intelligence like you've been sharing with us today, and what difference could that make?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We probably neither seeing the tip of the iceberg at this moment of time from that perspective. The problem, I can tell you, it's often where it is not easy to determine where this incident happened, right? You eventually only maybe realize when your container did arrive at the final depot in Germany and you say, oh, I have a problem here. And if you don't have really the tools and the controls we mentioned before, you will not be able neither to narrow down where this has happened, right? So I think the problem is also really often related to this, not being able to pinpoint, especially for the rail operators in the terminal, it's a smooth process. A seal is there. If there is no dedicated process, the container arrives, the container goes out. So that would be up to the shippers at the end of the day to report finally, or the freight forwarders to report the losses. But obviously, we need to become better on that one, I have to say, Sam, because, it's essential. Talking, raising awareness, and identifying areas, that's really a key for success. I mean, we've seen that we have an amazing TIS tool which can really, in a nutshell, you can see, okay, well, I'm here, okay, there is something going on here. So that's vital data at the end of the day.